back to the Green Connection. And you know, when we started this show over 20 years ago, it was dedicated to green building and green alternative building products. And over the years, the building products sort of disappeared, or they're not. It's more now energy efficient rather than. And the building products were also energy efficient, but they just aren't being used anymore. And so I've sort of broadened the scope of the show and done some different things that would actually be sustainable living in many different directions. And you know, one of the most sustainable individual groups in the world were the Native American Indians who came here to this country. They were in this country. I don't know how they got here, but thousands of years ago in Texas. Let me meet my guest first, and he'll know more about it. Hoppy Hopkins, which is a great name, and he's semi-Indian attired, and he has an Indian brother, and he is an Indian historian, and he goes around to schools and tells them about our Native American brothers. Welcome to the show, Hoppy.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
How long have you been? You yourself are not a full-blood Indian.
No.
But everyone has got
a Scotia bit.
We all do have some.
If your family's been in America for 400 years, you've got quite a bit just from being here.
And how long have you been studying the Indians?
Ever since I can remember. My best friend in the whole world from in elementary school was Choctaw Indian, and his mother would take us to powwows and dump us out and sink or swim. And I learned real quick about Indian culture around the powwow.
And the Indian dress? The Indian dress, you've got the earring and the bunch of stuff. We're going to look at this, what we have here a little later. We're going to talk about the Comanches. But first we want to talk about the contributions that the Native Americans made to the Americans. And you know, I always kind of hate to hear Native American. Yeah, they're Americans, and we're pseudo-Americans.
My Comanche brother said, we were doing a school program, and he said, you know, for a while I was an indigenous species, and then I became a Native American, and Indian works just fine. It's just a word. We got too much else to talk about that's important.
Well, the contributions that the Indians made, because they were the ones that were here first when the Pilgrims came from Europe, they had to learn a lot of things. And I think we have a list of what their contributions. What do you think were their major contributions to the?
Well, the three critical things to survival in order: food, shelter, clothing. And American Indians contributed to world cuisine and nutrition a list that's pretty fabulous. Beans, corn, squash, the three sisters. Everybody on the planet has embraced those. Potatoes. Europe didn't have a source of carbohydrates to support a population until the potato got there. And then you've got cassava, peanuts, pecans, cashews, tomatoes, chilies. What would the world be without chili peppers? Columbus took the first.
More and more. They even do pizza. Everything's got peppers on it.
Well, how could you have Italian food without tomatoes and peppers? And Columbus took the first chilies back to Italy in 1496, and within 2 years, they were firmly established in Szechuan cooking.
So tomatoes were actually born here?
Yeah.
And then taken over to
the cultural traditional dishes around the world that you couldn't have without American Indian native ingredients. Middle Eastern, their stew that's made with tomatoes and peppers and peanuts and cashews. Italian food with tomatoes and.
So there was no Italian food. What was saying? Anyway, we have a little video which shows some of the contributions that the American Indians have given to this country, to the people of this country. And you and I wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. So let's look at the video.
Native Americans have lived on this land long before the United States was created. They have made and continue to make many contributions to life in America, including arts and crafts, clothes, farming skills, a respect for the environment, and great stories and folk tales. Native Americans respect the environment and value all parts of nature. Native Americans are excellent farmers. They taught English settlers how to grow several crops such as corn, squash, and beans. We know these as the Three Sisters. Native American culture has provided us with many stories and folk tales. Tales of magic, tales of love, and stories of great chiefs, warriors, and heroes. It is important to remember that Native Americans are not just the people of the past, but also members of modern society.
The Native American came to San Antonio, the Palala group, Indians, P-A-L-A-L-A.
I am not familiar with the
Payaya, P-A-Y-A-Y-A. And so they were the first ones in San Antonio. But you had contact, not you didn't have contact, but your main focus, you live in Fredericksburg.
Correct.
Is the Comanches who were in Fredericksburg. So how did they are not actually listed in the tribes of Texas. How did they get to Fredericksburg?
Well, pre-Columbia, America, Comanches are a Udo-Aztecan speaker, and their oral history has it that they were in Texas and got driven out. They encountered the Spanish early on, struck up friendly relationship with the Spanish, got the horse early, and in the early 1700s came with the Spanish into Texas and basically drove the Apache out. And that's when the Comanche started establishing a presence in Texas.
And basically Fredericksburg.
The Comanches had 14 different bands which made up the Comanche Nation. And the strongest of those bands were the Penatuca, and they centered, their headquarters were around San Saba.
So the Comanches were actually a combination of other tribes that melded into them?
The Comanche Nation was 14 different bands.
It's like a state with the cities.
Or like the United States, or the Iroquois Nation, or the Cherokee Nation. These smaller bands get grouped together to make a stronger main unit.
Okay, there were friendly and there were unfriendly relations between the people that came from Europe and the Indians. In Fredericksburg, they all managed to work it out together and be a team, sort of, and actually form a government that melded down to our own form of government.
The Iroquois Nation, the Iroquois Confederacy, inspired Benjamin Franklin. He went to a lot of their powwows and paid attention. And one Onondaga chief one time took a bundle of arrows and took one arrow out and handed it to Franklin, took it back and broke it in half, then handed him the whole bundle of arrow and told him to break the whole bundle. And Franklin took that demonstration to the Constitutional Convention. This is what we can do as a group of 13 versus individuals as one. And Comanche's governmental style was parallel to that.
We need some of their intelligence now. I've been to tribal meetings. I used to did PR for the Alabama Coushatters in Livingston, and I've been to the council meetings. They were sort of, I can't say boring, I used to fall asleep. They don't say very much, and I guess they get something accomplished. In the beginning, they had, of course, their own government and their own rules. Today, do they still adhere to their own government, or do they, I mean, I know they have to adhere to our government also, but they still operate their reservations, which I think were a mistake from the beginning, but they still have a government of their own?
Well, it varies from tribe to tribe, which people confuse genetics and culture. And there are two cultures, I mean, there are two types of culture on this planet. Every culture in the world can be divided into a list of top-down cultures and a list of bottom-up cultures. And most American Indians are a bottom-up culture. The most common asked question I get is, how could those Germans get off the boat and get along with the Comanche? That just doesn't seem right.
So the Germans had come to Fredericksburg.
And Joseph Campbell said it best: when you celebrate your similarities, you prosper. When you celebrate your differences, you self-destruct. And Comanche culture and the German culture that came here was not the Prussian Eastern culture, but the bottom-up Celtic culture. And those cultures are virtually interchangeable.
That's they had a part in the Constitution, actually. I have a little video on that.
American Indians lived here long before explorers discovered America. American Indians roamed all throughout the country, thriving in sometimes harsh climates and difficult terrain. Their culture and traditions helped shape the lives of settlers and even our lives today. One of the most important influences from the American Indians was their way of government. Benjamin Franklin said that the idea of a strong federal government came from the Iroquois League of Nations. The Iroquois League of Nations was made up of 6 Iroquois groups who joined together to form a central government. The government had a council that made decisions to keep peace between the nations. The League of Nations also had a written constitution that all members of the League agreed to obey. The U.S. government today is based on a written constitution and a legislature with representatives from each state, thanks to the example of the Iroquois League of Nations. Much of American art has origins in early American Indian art. Beadwork, pottery, and sculpting were all important mediums of artwork in the American Indian culture. They were known to use natural resources to produce their artwork. The food in American Indian culture is something we all enjoy. The 3 Sisters refers to the 3 important crops to early American Indians. They grew corn, beans, and squash as their most vital crops. Corn was especially important because a lot can be made with corn. Something we all enjoy today is tortillas. Corn tortillas were a staple food in American Indian life. So the next time you have delicious tacos for dinner, you have the American Indian culture to thank.
The government, I think you said Ben Franklin, they realized that the Indians had some sort of government that was working. Even though they were warring, they still managed to get along, and they infused that into the Constitution. Is that?
Our form of government is patterned after those American Indian governmental forms.
Why did the government, our government, designate reservations to put all the people all the Indians that were actually Americans who should have first run of the whole land on one little space where they had no, they didn't really have the inspiration of role models and so all they had was themselves. And I know from experience with the Alabama Cashadas, the teenagers were absolutely awful. And one of the worst things that ever happened, we were going to open a museum there, and the representative of the tribe was the redbird, and so they had this wonderful redbird that they were going to put in the museum, which they did put in the museum. And the museum was ready to open, and the redbird disappeared, flew away. And the chief knew who did it, but they would do nothing until who did it would admit it, which was his conscience was supposed to bring him to admit it. Well, to this day, I don't know if they ever opened a gift shop, but museum. But the redbird never flew back. And yet, I do know that there are several, not several, but there are some members of Congress that are full-blood Indian. Women are beginning to take a bigger look at government. How do you designate, or how do you know that this person is part Indian and then he belongs in a reservation, rather than this person is Indian who's a really valuable contribution to our daily society?
That's the cognitive dissonance that gets fostered in the differences between culture and genetics.
It seems like the slaves were a terrible thing, but the difference is we brought them over from different countries, and I know it's difficult, but they did sort of meld into the general population. But the Indians they came off. I know Roland Poncho, who was their marketing person, he did a bad thing and they sent him back to Arizona. But now he's back, and I just read I was looking on the internet, he's 70 now. I need to email him. It's been years ago since I've seen him. But how do they manage to get off the reservation?
Well, the Comanche don't have a reservation. All my Comanche friends live just like we do.
So they
blue
managed
collar,
like
upper
Wallen,
middle
he came
class.
off the reservation and then melded in with the general public.
They assimilated.
But I don't understand why they are not more active in what government has really very few, and the few that they have are Republicans, which I don't understand. Because so that's sort of a opposite to the kind of governing that they had for
Well,
themselves.
the conflict we get into goes back to 1600 and the early founding of America. The Scots, the Irish, the Welsh, those Celtic cultures were the early colonists coming here to escape the monarchy and the feudal lords. And this bottom-up culture immediately assimilated with the American Indians. The Scots-Irish married into the Cherokee Nation early, and by 1700 the Cherokee were living in log cabins and with brick chimneys and weaving
And so
cotton
they
cloth.
assimilated the European culture long before.
They were state-of-the-art people. They saw what was good. Comanches made their teepees out of buffalo hide. But when sailcloth became available on the trade routes, well, it sews easier, it's lighter weight, dries out quicker. Everything about hemp canvas was far superior to buffalo hide for a house, and by 1850, most teepees were sewn out of hemp sailcloth.
It's what I did notice at the Alabama Coshada Reservation is the Head Start program was in effect there, and that made a big difference in how those little people looked at what they were and what they had available to them, and that's what should have been I think all along. I see you brought some things with you. Which tribes and what are they?
Just a few little show and tell things. When people in the hill country find arrowheads, most of the arrowheads they find are really dart points. And dart points are associated with the atlatl. And before the bow and arrow, this was the preferred method of inviting a bison to supper.
What do they do? Hit them over the head?
And it kind of works like, a kid with a spoonful of mashed potatoes flicking it. It gives you some additional leverage.
Do they do that intricate design on the edging?
Oh, that's just decoration. But
That's a sharp arrow.
the dart point goes in a foreshaft that goes into the dart. The dart goes into the atlatl, and the leverage throws it, and that will go all the way into a mastodon.
So that's better than the bow?
The bow didn't get here till about 1,100 years ago. And when the bow and arrow got here, the atlatl fell out of popularity. But the Aztec were still using that when the Spanish invaded, and the Aztec were penetrating Spanish armor with those flint points. But the Comanches, everything they needed, they could manufacture from the buffalo. The buffalo was their industry. And they had a use for every part of the buffalo. They didn't use every part of every bison, but they had a use for it. And just some examples, what can you do with a buffalo horn? Well, it does make a drinking cup.
Oh,
And it's like a travel mug. You can get on your horse and it doesn't spill very easy. You can also make spoons out of it to eat your soup.
oh. And they polished it.
In the old days, knives were made out of flint and bone before Europeans brought steel. Buffalo hide can be made into luggage.
Well, and clothes?
And clothes, buffalo hides also made their teepees until they got hemp sailcloth.
There's a magazine that I found out. Are you familiar with that Native Youth?
No.
Well, it's for Native young people, and it has all the It's a very interesting magazine. You might look it up on the internet, and gives you an idea of what the modern American Indian is thinking about and what he's looking at. And he's thinking the same thing you are. It's just like you're American German or American Swedish or American Indian. Where are the fur pelts?
This is a bow case and quiver. This is made from mountain lion skin,
Mountain lion.
which is a
Catching it is a challenge.
and like I said, the bow didn't get here till about 1100 years ago, and it replaced the atlatl. And with the horse, the bow got shorter because the horse lets you get closer. This little short bow is made out of Osage orange, and it will perform up there with modern compound bows. And
It might be a good golf club story.
well, actually, Indian kids learning archery had a game similar to golf, where one kid would shoot an arrow and everybody else would shoot at it. And whoever got the closest got all the arrows.
Oh,
And then the winner shot the next shot for the next hole, and everybody shot at it, and the game was played till one person had all the arrows.
well, they contributed a lot to games, which I think the video showed. Canoeing. I had a list of them. Canoeing,
Hook and ring, or the cup and ball,
badminton.
badminton, lacrosse, lawn darts.
Horseback riding, because the horses were here before the people.
Well, there are archaeological evidence of prehistoric horses, but it seems that they all got eaten.
Oh, well, I can't believe we ran out of time. We have to do this again because that's a very good subject, and I think it needs to get some attention as how much the American Indian contributed to the society. Thank you for being with us. I hope you enjoy hearing about the Indians, and maybe you'll look up and find out some more. Hope you have a happy week. Stay green and watch the Green Connection.